Welcome to Mindful Live number 62. Yes, welcome to Mindful Live 62. It is the 4th of the 4th, and in Trinidad, we outside. Yeah, no more safe zones. Safe zones are done from tonight, well, from today, but you know, the main thing usually happens in the night. So I wonder how pumping these events would be now. I'm sure the bar owners and the entertainers are all happy out there. I've seen multiple articles saying that Prestige Holdings is so happy. Prestige Holdings is so happy right now. They're they're blessing us now with free condiments again. The free condiments have returned. You no longer have to pay that $2. No, you can go in there and drown your fries in ketchup and bathe in that green goo they call pepper sauce and have at it. What are your thoughts on food prices raising on us every blink of an eye? Because not everyone will be able to sustain ourselves. As you ask about that, Mr. Oneness or Miss Oneness, I'm not sure, over on Instagram there, I also saw an article about that today. The opposition in Trinidad and Tobago has been raising that point that, you know, there may be a health crisis on the horizon because many people may not be able to afford food in the coming times because food prices are rising. And that is true, but here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. I still drink fine. Here's the strange thing. And I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want to be offensive with this. But I think for many people in the lower income side of life, if they have less money, they might eat healthier. We go plant what we want to. You see, Sir kind of says it over there. I kind of have that belief. Now here's the thing, right? There's a kind of side on this that you have to be careful with. You have to be careful with that. You don't. Some people glorify the struggles of poverty and some of the benefits of poverty and how sometimes poorer people seem to be healthier. They strive more for excellence, etc. in certain things. And yeah. But at the same time, I'm sure if you ask a poor person if they'd rather be poor or if they'd rather get some more resources, they'd get some more resources. So it's not like saying that in order for people to be poor, you want to give them less money. I remember one candidate for presidency over in the United States, Mr. Bloomberg. What's his first name again? The billionaire Bloomberg guy. Forgot his first name. Irrelevant. But when he was in New York, was he mayor or going up for mayor or governor in New York? He had something with Mike Bloomberg. Correct. He said he didn't want to give the poor people more money because they would buy unhealthy food with it. So his solution was in fact to give them less cash. And that sounds insane, especially coming from a billionaire, but you could understand a point from what he's saying. I disagree, but you could understand a point. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be 1 + 1 = 2, where if people get less resources, we are going to end up in a health crisis. Because many times when people get a certain amount of resources, there's to me, there's Blessed Night Schizo over on YouTube. Nice having you there. To me, there's a kind of balance there. So, okay, there was this study that showed the more money that you give underprivileged women, their children become healthier. Fact. It was directly proportional, and this is literal cash money. They went out and gave cash money to underprivileged women who were having children, of course, underprivileged mothers, during their pregnancy and during the early childhood phases. And the more money you gave them, the better health their children had. That's a given. So I think obviously there's a threshold there, but there's also a level where over essential you get more, and usually people use that to buy more luxurious food, like KFC. If we were to look at possibly the demographic of the KFC buyer, you know, it's I know my live viewers understand the context, so we don't have to put a lot of qualifiers into how we're saying this. I don't mean any offense in how we're saying this, but it's just reality and the reality of how societies break down. Mydrin, have you catch the highs of a cashless system? Yes, I have, and we spoke about that before. Yes, Mike Bloomberg, yes. And if we look at the general demographic of, say, the KFC buyer, I might say that may be middle to lower middle income buyers, maybe. I don't think that's necessarily the wealthiest of people. So if someone were to get less money in that bracket, maybe they'd cut out the KFC. I'm not sure necessarily. That's all I'm saying there. I'm not sure that the increase in food prices as it stands in Trinidad and Tobago is necessarily going to lead to a health crisis. Not in that way. All right. So, as quite a few people were speaking about Miss Motley in the chat there, and she has quite a few admirers over here, that's the news that I'd start off speaking about today. We're talking about the prices of gas over in Barbados. So, not too long ago, there was a story that many people took to compare to Trinidad and Tobago. Miss Mia Motley over in Barbados did some kind of thing in her budget there to, you know, make life easier with the increase in gas prices and the population inside of Barbados. And many people are like, look what Miss Mia is doing over in Barbados. She loves her people so much. What's going on here in Trinidad and Tobago? Now, here's the thing. I think she's charismatic. I think she has a pretty good PR team around her. But I don't think many of these things are necessarily as grand as some people might have them seem to be. This isn't necessarily a direct criticism at her, but a critique at how you view decisions from politicians. Petroleum prices increase for April. Barbadian consumers will be paying more for petroleum products effective midnight Sunday, April 3rd. The price of gasoline will be $4.13 a litre, an increase of 14 cents. Bear in mind the EC dollar is somewhere 2.5, 2.5 to 1. Well, 2.5 TT to 1 EC dollar. So that's quite a bit. Diesel will cost $3.45 and kerosene $2.11. Wow. Even petrol cheap, even petrol expensive over there. Huh. Imagine that. The price of petrol could be comparing to the price of our gas. In an effort to shield consumers from the full increase of refined petroleum products, the government announced in its Budget and Financial Proposal 2022 the capping of the value-added tax on gasoline and diesel. However, in light of increasing oil prices internationally, the prices had to be adjusted upward for April. And this is the thing. This is the thing. Many people seem not to understand that reality is reality. And yes, the government can say, oh, we wish that the prices didn't affect you, but the government does not actually have an effect on the international gas prices. All that they did was they capped the amount of taxes that they were taking from it. So here's what is happening there. When you buy gas, the government takes money from you. But what they said is we will limit how much money we take from you when you buy gas. And everyone all over the Caribbean took to that and ran sharing with that bit of news. Now, here's something strange I find about Barbados. Here is something strange. When I like reading Caribbean news in general. I've taken quite a bit of Caribbean news. When I go over to Barbadian news and you read Barbados Today, their main online publication, there's hardly ever negative news. Barbados Today seems a lot like a kind of China's state news kind of stuff. You have to really go digging sometimes to see some of that. So when you look at these things and you see a government have put a cap on VAT, their newspaper makes it seem like, oh, they're fighting the high prices and Barbados is going to have it so good. And then this happens. Here's a good comparison with this. Meanwhile, the adjusted price of LPG, 100 cylinder, will be $167. The 25-pound cylinder, this is the 25-pound that sits next to your gas tank. Most people in Trinidad and Tobago, if you have those big tanks outside, that's the 100-pound. Generally speaking, inside is the 25-pound. Their 25-pound will retail at $47. Remember, 2.5 to 1. So that's nearly $120 for a tank of gas. How much do you pay for your tank of gas in Trinidad and Tobago that is so badly falling apart? That is so badly, remember, the Guyanese vice president told us that Trinidad and Tobago is falling apart. Certain members inside of our population would have us believe that Barbados is so much better. Maybe we should go live under Mia Motley. You pay $25 for your tank of gas here. You'd go over there and pay $120 for it. Feel free. Feel free. When you have time, you can give your opinion on a cashless system, because I wasn't on live when you were explaining to the panel. Yeah, we could talk back over the cashless system. What do you think about the biofuel curb the rising cost of fuel in the international space? Reality is it have to change. Biofuel. Here's the problem with biofuel. This is the problem with environmentalism on a whole. This is the problem with environmentalism. I studied for quite some time environmental and natural resource management. I like the environment. For Form 6, I did environmental science. I love that subject. I taught environmental science. I really like it. But there's a problem sometimes with environmentalists. They think like there's a way for there to be some kind of perfect system that has zero effect on everything. That's not really true. So some people speak about biofuel. So you basically get plants to produce fuel for you. Here's the thing. To get that fuel, you have to grow the plants. To grow the plants, they cleared down they cleared down thousands of hectares of the main rainforest in the world, the Amazon rainforest. Yeah, they're clearing down hectares of the Amazon rainforest to grow some of the crops there to now produce biofuel. So what's the point of that? Does that help? Does that actually help? In the grand scheme of things, when you put it all together, maybe the biofuel doesn't have as bad of an impact on the environment when it is burnt, but then how do you get it? And if you need to produce enough biofuel for the entire world to offset the cost of the gas, how do you get that much? And here's the thing. As it stands, possibly the cheapest fuel still is going to be the fossil fuels. The reason the prices in the fossil fuels are rising right now have more to do with political strife. The reason gas and oil prices are on the rise isn't because it has all of a sudden become much more rare or it's become more difficult to get it out of the soil. No, not really. It's because of the political strife going on right now. So it's as it were an artificial raise in a sense. There isn't enough old cooking oil to give us all that much biofuel. The general way that they got biofuel, at least in Brazil, was they planted, I believe it was corn. They use. Do the pros outweigh the cons? Usually no. If the pros outweighed the cons, people would have been doing it. Yeah, that's the thing with the free market. That's the intention of the free market. Listen, if I could have planted crops, made a usable fuel that was more profitable and more useful to the society, it was sugarcane, okay, grand. I would have done it and made profit. But I cannot. That's the free market idea. And I don't like when so many people make it seem like certain realities of the free market that we are, as it were, victims of, such as certain increases in certain food prices right now, the increase in oil and gas, as we saw, and we're paying more at the pump. Very likely coming this budget may have some discussion about that again, but that's the reality all over the world. That's why, again, to go back to the same falling apart argument, whenever you're criticizing, especially your own country, you have to look at comparisons. You have to look at criticizing as compared to what? As compared to what? Okay, so here is terrible, but it's terrible as compared to what? So, Miss Motley, I don't necessarily dislike her as a leader. I could understand why she has her support. She speaks well in public. She has a good showing. When she's confronted with questions, she answers well. She seems a very smart person and sharp. Sharp is the word I meant. A very sharp person, and that's great. But the charisma on its own doesn't necessarily change reality. And my take on a lot of Miss Motley's statements is, I've said this previously in lives, on multiple occasions she has said it, that what we're looking for is better global leadership. Miss Motley is basically an avowed globalist. She has intentions for more globalism inside of the Caribbean, and personally I don't think that stands to benefit smaller countries like us. I do not want those larger countries to come in global leadership over some global organizations. I do not like this liberal economic order, and I would not like a new world order coming out. I've said New World Order, and I know some people who are into some conspiracies, their antennas probably stuck up there. But when people are talking about New World Order, it's not necessarily something overly fantastic or out there and spooky and scary, and the Illuminati and the Freemasons and etc. and etc. It's not necessarily that deep, If you go online and look up the liberal economic order, they would literally tell you that the United Nations, the IDB, a lot of those international bodies and organizations were created after World War II to create a liberal economic order, basically, that the intention was so that the world does not end up in further wars like World War II. They have it there. And when they speak about the New World Order, they're talking about redoing those similar old organizations, the UN, the IDB, the WHO, etc., 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 and creating a new world order. It's pretty simple. But here's the thing. I don't really like it. Because when the cockroach in the dance with the fowls, you tend to become the menu. If she likes it so much, why did she remove Barbados from under the Queen? Here's the thing. Globalism isn't necessarily pro-monarchy. And being under the Queen isn't being more linked to the modern globalist structure. Probably being under the Queen is probably further from the modern globalist structure. The modern globalist structure doesn't seek to have hegemony, leadership, power outside of this global structure. So having power to the crown isn't necessarily their thing. It's coming under the global organizations like the IDB, the WHO, listening to these global experts, and this strange guy out there in Austria, what's his name, Klaus Schwab, and that World Economic Forum, and those people who have grand visions for the entire world. Yeah, that's the people that I'm more worried about with the globalism. In Germany, it's 15 per liter for diesel. Yikes. Yes, it was corn they used. They also were using cassava. So yeah, as I was saying, maybe for some people I could understand the leap forward towards globalism, because globalism provides certain resources and makes it much more available to more common people. But after that, after just the increased opportunity, because colonialism did the same thing. The colonizers did the same thing. When European power colonized India, they brought about swift technological advancement in the country. When the British came to the New World, they did the same thing. When the Spanish came to the New World, they brought swift technological advancement. And yes, these countries became much more advanced. They got much more resources, etc., etc., etc. But you were still a colony. Good night, Richard Glubman. Always nice to have you here. But and what I'm saying here isn't something that I'm guessing at. You could listen to Miss Motley's speeches and hear that she is more of a proponent for that global linkage, and it is kind of the modern liberal view, but I kind of don't like it, and I'm probably even afraid of it, I might see. Good night all. Good night. Good night. But the thing is, so often in politics, we watch one group do something, and another group comes in, and they are able to convince you that they would do so much different. But the thing that I nearly seem to always keep saying is, I think the role of a politician, when given so much authority, leads to some of these problems nearly inevitably. You're looking for a perfect person to be able to really lead politics. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I was looking over at some news out of Tobago. Good night, 21 gun salute. I was looking at some news over in Tobago with the new leadership out in Tobago. And personally, I'd like to see them succeed. I'd like to see them succeed. I'd like to see the PDP run Tobago perfectly. But there seems to be already some problems arising. There seems to already be some problems arising here. THA to review brother overseeing brother. Well, boy, you need to sleep to see that. The appointment of political analyst Dr. Winford James as deputy chairman of the recently appointed Studley Park Enterprises Limited board is under review, says Chief Secretary Farley Augustine. He was responding to questions from the media during Monday's Monday, a production of the Tobago House of Assembly held virtually on Monday. Now, what's it with these parties on Monday? I know the United National Congress has the Monday night forum, and now they have the Monday's mandate Monday. What's it with Monday? Like, why Monday? I might sound like an anarchist, but the current dynamic of governance should change. That may not necessarily sound like anarchy. And here's the thing. Here's the thing with anarchy. Anarchy is sometimes misunderstood. There is a governance structure called anarchy that some people do push for. And when they say anarchy, they are not talking about mayhem. They are not talking about despotism. They are not talking about insanity. They are talking about no government. And because there's no government doesn't mean there's no order. The belief of many anarchists is that humans do create their own order, and in many of the cases, government just inhibits that. And yeah, you know things, Kevin. Anarcho Capitalism, anarcho capitalists, and that's their belief. Now, I've listened to it and I understand. And like their idea, so one of the main things that many people ask about when you talk about no governance, people are quick to ask, well, who's going to build the roads? And that's the most insane question. The people who stand to benefit from the road will build the road. A prime example of that, where I'm gardening right now, where my little farm is right now, is down an agricultural road, and for some reason the government seems like they have no interest in fixing those roads. So little by little, me and those who also garden inside of that horrible road are actually fixing the road. And that's what happens. Sounds similar to socialism? No. Socialism is, so like this is anarchy on the spectrum, this is socialism on the spectrum. Socialism is the polar opposite. The idea of socialism is that the government controls everything. The idea of anarchy is that individuals control everything through legally binding agreements and arrangements between themselves, through contracts, as we do generally. So everything is done through contracts and private enterprise. You want police? Well, you hire private security to do the policing for you. So, yeah. I'm more interested in knowing what the economic plans will look like. What do you mean what the economic plans would look like? The economic plans would look like you do what you want to do. Anywhere has done that yet? Well, here's a prime example. All the countries of the world interact with each other through anarchy. There's not a global government. And Trinidad, when Trinidad is interacting with Guyana, we have to make our own contracts and interact on a contractual basis. That's basically what they speak about with anarchy. There's no controlling governance structure over the entire world. That's a prime example. Now, I don't think there has been a real world example in modern times. There may have been some examples in ancient times, but not really in modern times. It's very rare. And who knows, partly the problem may be that those in governance, this is the thing with governance. You're looking at someone who is benefiting from being in a position as a governing figure. And then you're going to ask them, you know what? Let's decrease the amount of benefit you are getting and return some benefit to the people. And let's see if that would be better. Yeah, right. Sure, they're going to do that. We should be governed by districts, a mix of elders and a middle-aged qualified members of said district. We set common law and social law. That goes more down to better, as it were, federalization. We wouldn't call it federalization in Trinidad and Tobago. We'd call it local governance. And I fully agree with that. I think governance, and I've said this multiple times in different lives, I think governance should be as close to the people as possible. So the person that's in charge of my street ideally should be living on my street. So if there's a hole in my road, in my street, I could walk to your house and throw a stone through your window and get something done immediately. But the further away the governance is from the people, the more difficult it is to actually get things done. And that, to bring it around full circle, that is kind of my problem with globalism. Globalism, the governance in globalism, is extremely far away. These global leaders may be sitting in mansions in Europe. And they're speaking about things that they have no idea about. One of the reasons I like looking at some of the American news and what goes on in there is because, one, they keep a lot of records, so you're able to see what happens, the action and consequence, the action and reaction. You're able to see that pretty clearly. And they speak English, and they're massive. So you get to see, as it were, some social experiments going on right there. And in the United States, you see that very clearly. For example, their gun argument that they regularly have. Listen, I could understand, y'all who are in the life for a while may know where I stand on some of that. Where would the money come from in an anarchy? What do you mean, where would the money come from? What do you mean, who prints the money? If you're asking who prints the money, then no one needs to print the money. You can all decide on what you would have as your common view of value. Gold is a prime example. And then there could be trading, and then there could be online trading like Bitcoin, where there's no governance controlling Bitcoin. You could trade any one of those cryptocurrencies with any anarchist system. It fits in perfectly. Right. So in the United States, you could see the problem when governance is so far away from the people. So, for example, some people speak about banning guns totally because they live in New York, where their neighbor is through a wall, and if someone breaks into their neighbor's house and the neighbor shoots off a gun, it may go through the wall and kill the other neighbor in the neighboring apartment. But then there are also places in the United States where someone may be living on a ranch where the police are 2 hours away from any response, and they may have wild feral hogs that rove in bands of 40 plus running through their property that will eat their babies and children, literally, if given a chance. So they kind of need their guns over there. And if you have a governance structure that isn't directly close to the people, they may not understand those nuances and those differences. What you may need in Port of Spain, you may not need in Caroni. And you don't necessarily want somebody living in Port of Spain determining how life has to go in Caroni. All right. Hey, colonizer. Good night. A long time. Yes. Thank you. Good night to you too, Gray. Mindful night, brother. True Christopher. Yes, put those in government on the minimum wage at $22.50 per hour and see how good they work at that stage and go from there. All right. As I was saying, though, yeah, but it wasn't full. Anarcho capitalism was kind of what started the United States to some extent. That's why they fought a war over, what was it, a 3% tax on tea. That kind of was what triggered the war. They were like, hey, we're running our own business here. Capitalism is the king. What I want to trade with my neighbor, I trade with my neighbor, and they trade back with me what I want. Who is king? Who was it? Richard? Was it Richard, I think, back then? Who is the king to demand some percentage of my arrangement? Sir, we will fight. Taxation without representation is theft. And the anarchists and some of those libertarians go as far as to say taxation on a whole is theft. But that's a whole other discussion. We're talking Tobago. The British are coming. Yes, they are coming. Mr. James, who was appointed on the Studley Park Enterprises Limited board, is the brother of Trevor James, the THA's Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Renewal, the division responsible for the Studley Park Quarry. So one of the men who was appointed as deputy chairman of this Studley Park Quarry business is the brother to the secretary that oversees the quarry. Winford James is among 11 committee members appointed for a year to oversee the quarry's operations. That seems a little problematic. And here's the thing. When I read that name and I read that Mr. Winford James was being appointed to that post, I found that so interesting because, as I say so often, is that really a problem though? Yes, it kinda is. It kinda is. The brother is appointed as a chairman inside of a company that is overseen by his other brother, who is the secretary in charge of it. That does not seem like something that would engender trust. That's like, let's say we have the Minister of Finances, Mr. Imbert, and he appoints his brother as the governor of the central bank. Can you imagine if another Imbert was the governor of the central bank? We won't like that. I can assure you, we won't like that. But the thing I found even more interesting than that, as I've said so often, I like to read some news, so I take in a good bit of news. And, well, you see, Hazel and Patos weren't necessarily in that same range. It would have been like if Patos was the Minister of Education and he appointed Hazel as the chief of the EFCL that is now going debunked, that construction company under the ministry. But both of them as ministers are at a different level. Brothers could have been both different secretaries in the THE. So I still think that's a bit different. And just by the way, I am old enough to remember that the Hazel and Patos business did actually have quite a bit of talk and back and forth because of it. But yes, as I was trying to say, I've read a bit of news. I remember reading quite a bit as the run-up to this election was going on. And there was this political commentator that I read so often, named Dr. Winford James. Now, I've had conversations in person with him before. We did some work by him before. And I find it so interesting sometimes when you read some of these articles and some of these pieces that these commentators and advisors write, and they speak about, like, if you know, they're coming from this point of neutrality, this unbiased perspective where I'm looking at both sides and I see here that the PNM in Tobago has really been doing an injustice to the Tobagonians for the last 30 years. And you hear them speak about this with such gusto. And, you know, you think that this is just, you know, a level, fair, neutral thing. And then the other party comes into power and all of a sudden you get a job inside of the other party. Now, nothing is wrong with getting a job, but you must admit that there could be an interpretation that one may be singing for their supper. I don't doubt that is happening. It's happening all over. It's just who is found out. That's it at the end of the day now. Who is found out and who isn't. Breakfasts. I remember that so well. So well. Poor Auntie Hazel. She never lived that one down. The breakfasts. Sure it happening here. And here's the problem with even pointing back at the PNM or any other party. The PDP got into power in Tobago because they were promising different politics. They were promising a change. They were promising to do something different inside Tobago, move different from the PNM. One of the topics that Mr. Farley Augustine kept speaking about during his campaign was that kind of job business. was funny over there, Schizo on YouTube, was that kind of job business where he was saying that the PNM were only hiring their friends and family to work inside of areas that they controlled. That was part of the act. You could go back. I mean, the news stories are still there. The ink is probably barely dry on some of those news stories where Mr. Augustine, Farley Chavez Augustine, was saying that this was a big problem with the PNM. So you cannot get into position now, do the same thing and say, well, look, PNM did it. Okay, even if PNM did it, that's the whole problem. Weren't you saying that was the problem? It's like you got in. Someone who was my gardener was cutting down all my plants that I was planting, trying my little trees and things that I'm trying to grow all about my yard. I had this other gardener. And you came as a new gardener and looked about and said, hey, look, that man cutting down all your good plants, you know. Boy, I good at this gardening business. I cutting around all your plants. I molding your plants and thing for you. And yeah, just choose me. Fire that man and choose me. And I like, okay, well, I'll fire that man and I'll choose you. And then you come in and you chopping down my plants the same way. What sense that makes? You cannot then say, well, I'm chopping down your plants too. But look, remember your old gardener used to cut down. Yeah, he used to. That's why he's fired. You cannot now point to him and say, hey, he used to do that, so I can do it too. That doesn't make sense. I despise that. I despise that. The king must repay the kingmakers. This is human nature. And this is the problem with politics. And they so regularly talk about, they're going to get campaign financing laws and etc., etc., etc. But it's just one of the difficulties with the nature of the political system that we are in. In order for you to rise to the top in our political system, you need a lot of allies. It's inevitable. You need a lot of allies. Nearly no one can do it without a lot of allies. And do you think all of your allies are going to request nothing once you actually get into the position of power? That's how Trinidad's politicians work. They depend on the populace's short memory. Kinda true. But this is more why I was hoping, what I was hoping for from the PDP. But this is one of the things that's easier said than done. All right. Empress Roni says that the PDP did not get any set of financing. That may be true, but the favors aren't only in the financing side. Remember, I was just speaking about a certain political analyst with a PhD. There were actually multiple of them, multiple Dr. Jameses from Tobago that were writing articles profusely during this period, lambasting the PNM, giving some credo to the PDP, suggesting that they should be given this opportunity. Listen, those things are favors to some extent. If you have the intellectual heavyweights on your side, pushing out these topics on a regular, this is something that can work to your benefit, and you may have to reward them. Many people are, to some extent, political influencers. They are political influencers. Who knows? In the next election, if I'm a political influencer and I could come out here and say, and over a few consecutive lives, sway certain votes a certain way. Maybe when whoever next takes governance and I sway some votes in their favor, they may be looking to set me up with a talk program on the government station. And that's how those things work. As simple as that might be. I may not necessarily finance them, but if I am able to say enough words that they think can sway enough votes in their favor, they may have to repay that in the long run. People never think Trump would have been POTUS. I don't think they guessed that. 4 state boards for Nathan. Why not? A little state board, sit down on a state board and do nothing. By all means. THA Education Secretary, new curriculum to be Tobago-centric. But he greased the right polls and social media was on his side. My take on Trump wasn't about greasing the right polls. Trump was a symptom of what was going on in the US, and I think what may be still going on in the wider Western world. The same thing I was speaking about, the liberal economic order. Let me jump off of Tobago for a bit. The liberal economic order, with what they were doing all around the world, I think for quite some time they overplayed their hand. They thought that they had control over everything and they were just pushing whatever they had desired to push. And you look at Obama, and that was basically it. They had someone there who had the PR system working all for them. Almost all of the major news stations all over the world were on Obama mania. Everyone was an Obama supporter. People in Trinidad and Tobago wearing Obama t-shirts like they know anything about Obama. Obama bombing children over in the Middle East, but that's fine because the news won't report on it. And they had a special technique back then. Anytime they kill a child that was a male or a civilian, if you happen to be over 16 years, they killed someone, they had a term for it, someone of military age or something like that. It could have been anybody they killed. They had special terms for it in the media. And this backfired on them because people started using the internet, and the general controllers of the liberal economic order, the liberal world order, they no longer had the control they'd once thought that they had. Rooney is upset over the little snippet of Tobago news. We'd get back to it. They no longer had the control they had. So they thought that they had the control. And what they did was they pushed Trump in the earlies because they thought that Trump would not be able to win. So they wanted Trump to win on the Republican side. They allowed him to win. But they thought no way he would beat Hillary. But what they didn't understand was the taste of many people had soured for that kind of liberal economic order business. People were fed up of it. People were fed up of it. The ultra push to every single liberal idea that blows past in the wind. For every single bit, people weren't for it. People weren't for it. And that's what shocked them in the long run. The Trump. And then they were so shocked that they screamed at the world for 4 years. Screamed about Trump, lied and impeached the man. People are now being sued over some of the lies that were told to try and impeach Trump. Like, I mean, just let the guy do his governance business for 4 years. But that was impossible. They screamed and screeched for 4 years to get him out, and they did get him out, and now we see what's happening in return. And they voted in Biden, who also pulled troops from Afghanistan and gave the Taliban breathing space. I feel like they did that on purpose. Not only breathing space, they gave them more helicopters. The Taliban has a stronger air force than the United Kingdom. The Taliban has more Black Hawks in their employ than the entire British army. Imagine that. That is what the United States left inside of Afghanistan. Something wasn't right with that. Anyway, let's get back to Tobago, where what Rooney was upset about. Yes, the Tobago Education Secretary is saying that the new curriculum is to be more Tobago-centric. The redesigned school curriculum in Tobago under the leadership of the Progressive Democratic Patriots will be Tobago-centric. Secretary of Education, Research and Technology, Zoraisha Hackett, has said. It's no imagination, it's reality. The US did that in Vietnam as well. The US did a lot of horrible things all over. Vietnam, the story of Vietnam is one of the worst atrocities you could hear. They need to teach them about tourism. Well, when they say Tobago-centric, I'm guessing that tourism would be part of what it means to be Tobago-centric. I am guessing because that seems to make sense to me. If you're teaching Tobago-centric stuff, tourism has to be an important part of that. She said interdisciplinary approaches to education would incorporate other divisions within the THA to promote overall quality of life for Tobagonians. The revision of the curriculum, as I said before, to include Tobago-centric content and contexts, extensive stakeholder engagement of all staff, students, parents, and general public that will be inclusive to the education sector, amounting in higher rates of digital literacy. I'd love to know what Tobago-centric education means. I'd love to know it too. I love to see actually what it means when it comes to fruition. Now, here's the thing. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think all education should be more centric, focused in, around the location it is in. That makes sense. Now, how they do it is not necessarily a difficult, an easy thing. Because you need to be able, this is what I think education is more supposed to be like. And this, as we were speaking earlier about governance being closer to the people, I think if governance were closer to the people, what history, Ronnie? Obama wasn't really black. I'm going to touch on that one, Schizo. We will touch on that one as you say that. And as that would even relate to reparations. Anyway, what I think education should be more like is more specific to the people and what is there in their environment. More direct to that. And I think if governance were closer to the people, more local, that we'd have more education like this. That the Shugwanas education would be more Shugwana centric. Like something as simple as learning the geography of Shugwanas if you're doing education in Shugwanas. Something as simple as learning better geography of Tobago if you're doing education in Tobago, that your geographical examples, that your examples of animals, your examples of an ecosystem, your examples of a food chain, your examples of a food web are more specific to Tobago. Your examples in chemistry. You talk about the whistleblower tonight? Nah, I didn't talk about the whistleblower. Are much closer to the reality that you live in. I think that would be much more important. The thing is that these things are actually very difficult to do in real life. This is why most education systems, they just copy and paste from something else and slap it in. To create your own education system and your own learning topics, you need to have somebody who is skilled in the topic, who is knowledgeable in the topic, and also who is creative, like me. But like honestly though, I think I may be able to create an educational syllabus, especially for something like geography that I like, that will be more centric around a local group. And I think that is important. I do think that is important. I hope that when the THA does what they're speaking about here, that they do it sensibly. And they don't just come in with some cliched talk about Tobago, speak about some basic Tobago history and call that somehow Tobago centric. That wouldn't make sense. As Schizo was saying over on YouTube, Obama wasn't even black. Now, there are some interesting discussions when it comes up to this. Do you think people are more closely linked? Like, how would you link people more? By their ancestrage from an entire continent, by their common history for the last 1,000 years, or by their common history for probably the last 200 years. If you're talking about common history for the last 200 years, then Obama isn't really similar to the American black. Many American blacks, actually these days, as you know, there are more specific terms for everything, go by a different term. ADOS, ADOS, I don't know how they actually pronounce it, ADOS, whatever. American descendants of slaves, ADOS. That's a pretty specific term. And many American blacks go by that term for a specific reason. Because some of the problems that American blacks that are American descendants of slaves face would be completely different from some people who may be seen as black, but they may have come over to the United States in the last 30 years from, say, Kenya. Them ADOS is the worst on Twitter. Ooh, can't take them sometime. You're not lying there. You're not lying there. But yes, Obama's parents were from Africa. I believe Kenya. The topic is varying right now. We're talking about Obama. But we're from Kenya, and then one of them had a child with a white woman, and Obama grew up with his white mother and his white grandparents and family. So he came from half African, half white, and grew up in a white family. So, by most contemporary cultural understandings of what you may call black, he was probably further from black than Trump. I heard someone say this back then, that Trump was actually the first black president because of his what's the word for this? His predilection to bling. How much bling he likes, they call him the first black president. And in honest fact of the matter, in culturally, Donald Trump may have been closer culturally to the majority of American descendants of slaves than Obama was. But some people are very skilled in the politics at giving you 6 for 9, giving you that little trade-off. So I put someone that I want to put there, make sure they're the correct complexion, and you cheer for them, and you have no care for what they do otherwise than that. All you know is that's the first black person. While what does that matter? How does that help you? Does that really even help you? But that's the nature of politics, ain't it? But coming into that, when we're talking about things like reparations, how does someone like Obama fit in? Does he get any reparations? Would you give Obama any reparations? He grew up after into adulthood. He grew up as part of the American black culture. Many people in America fully call him black. I remember Donald Trump himself got into quite a bit of problems for asking to see Obama's birth certificate many times. And would you then give reparations to him? And I'm sure, though, there are some people who are fully looking white and may have more ancestry from actual American descendants of slaves. That's an interesting conversation. Nah, I hate when people try to make white people more black than actual black people. What is more black? That is the entire thing. It's according to what do you mean by black. If you mean genetics, as in, and if you mean genetics, which genetics? Are you talking about just skin color? Only the genetics that code for skin color? So anyone who is genetically closest to skin color. So if you go down to India and see some Indians who have really, really high deposits of melanin in their skin, are they more black? Or are we talking hair texture here? Are we talking only hair texture? So are we talking for the genetics that codes for hair texture? If we have some white people with some crunchy hair, what is black? What is black in terms of that? And in reality, most of the time when people speak about black, they are actually more directly speaking about a cultural component. And if you are indeed speaking about a cultural component, then that goes way beyond skin color, and there will be some people of lighter skin that may identify closer with black. It's like how some people always want to pressure the Caucasian Caribbean people. When they see a white man speaking Jamaican patois, they're so upset. But the guy probably born and grew there, and maybe some black man there may be some white Jamaican speaking Jamaican patois who have a closer linkage to it than maybe even Bob Marley's grandchildren, who may have grown their entire life in the United States and occasionally visit Jamaica for holidays. We're not talking culture, so we're literally only talking genetics. And then in that case, if we're only talking genetics, what's the point? What's the purpose? What benefit is there in identifying that? What you present as? And so what you're saying is you really dislike that if someone presents as white and someone says they're black, you despise that. That's something that you really dislike. So what would happen for some of my cousins, some of my second cousins, who look white but their grandmother is pretty black? And if they call themselves black, would you be upset about that? Weren't you the one, Ronnie, or someone in the live? Someone in the live brought up Meghan Markle and talking about black. Meghan Markle looks black to whom? When Meghan Markle went on Oprah and talked about the Queen and those in the royal family, spoke about her children, and they spoke about them at racism, I rolled my eyes. Like, who speaks about Meghan Markle's complexion? And they were wondering if the child is going to be a little darky. Like, right, sure, yeah, someone really wondered that, Meg. Yeah, sure. So, that's why I really... Exactly my point. Exactly my point. I find the genetic arguments to be impossible to make. It's impossible because none of us have done genetic tests to even be able to summarize all of this. A lot of the argument, and when we actually speak, so often we blur the lines between genetics and culture. And to be fair, it's not only something that happens with black and Africans, it happens with nearly every race. So often we blur the lines between the genetic component and the cultural component. And that's where a lot of problems are created. All right. I think I've gone for quite some time over on YouTube there. I thank you for tuning in, and do tune in tomorrow. It was nice. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and I'll see you again tomorrow at 9:30 for the next Mindful Live. I'll be over on TikTok for a short while after for a little discussion. If you'd like to join me there, feel free. If not, peace tomorrow.